Hi, this is Rick Harsch with today's masterclass in fiction writing. You can skip this ad in 3 days. I was going to have a cigarette, but yesterday I created a machine that helps me stop smoking. See? Take the cigarette out, but then the snake bites you and you put it down. So, what I want to talk about is two things. I made two videos yesterday. One was on the blurb, and one was on, one was a little crazy. What I was trying to express was post-traumatic stress syndrome. Why? Because yesterday, the number of people who died from COVID-19 in the United States surpassed the number of people who died from the Vietnam War in the United States. And although I am a self-exiled, anti-United States American leftist and despise the system in the United States, I have a lot of people I care about there, and I feel very bad for the situation because it took a lunatic government to do this. Right now, a lot of countries in Europe have governments that they're not too happy with, and they're worried about right-wing governments, and even here in Slovenia, they're worried about this crazy self-serving prick who runs our government. But he's being forced to do the right things regarding COVID-19, and Slovenia has been very successful in combating it. The United States had plenty of warning, and but the government is so insane that they did nothing, and people around the infant in the White House have allowed him to run things, and in this case, it's costing them lives. I would guess that at least 50,000 people have died, more than would have, if the government was properly run, if the medical institutes were supported properly, and if the measures that epidemiologists were calling for early on were put into place. So, in a sense, you can say that Trump has slaughtered Trump and his people. Trump and the culture that allows Trump to persist have led to over 50,000 deaths. And I was very unhappy about that. So, the other video was on the blurb. And there's one thing that's important about the blurb, and we're talking now about decorum. Writer's decorum. Is there such a thing as decorum for writers? Yes, there is. Writers should always support other writers, no matter what. One way that writers do that is through the blurb. If somebody asks you for a blurb and you think their book sucks, you try to write as good a blurb as you can, and don't worry about it. Nobody is going to judge you posthumously or pre-posthumously for writing a really wonderful blurb for a really shitty book. And in fact, the book that I burned, the reason I looked for it yesterday was that, show the burned. Yeah, remind them of the burned. Yeah. The reason I thought of that book was because it was a really, really shitty book, and it had about 14 blurbs. They were short, and if you read between the lines, you can see that people, were just doing what they had to do. But they did it. And I don't know if I got it from him, but here's one of the most generous writers who ever lived, Henry Miller. This is Colossus of Marusi, in which he is largely talking about friendship. He and his Greek friends, artist friends, poet friends, fiction friends, all friends, who would talk wildly and each in their own language and yet still communicate because of their generosity and so on. Maybe that's where I got my attitude about helping other writers, but I've always been called upon, even before I read Henry Miller. People have always sought my opinion about books or what they were writing, and I've always said yes. Always say yes. You must always say yes. You do have time, because that's part of being a writer, is helping other writers, no matter how good or bad. I remember, in fact, the very unrewarding case back in the mid-'80s, reading a book by two women that was very, 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 very badly written. And I had to tell them in as nice a way as I could that that book was not going to be published as it was. They were not very, they had offered to pay me to do it, and of course I didn't take any money. But I also told them, honestly enough, but kindly, that their book wasn't going to be published, and it needed certain things, and they were very defensive, and I never saw them again. But I'll give you a counterexample. Here in Slovenia, where people tend to write in Slovene, a Slovene friend of mine came up and said, "Hey, Rick, I got this friend who's written a novel in English, and it's a real big novel, and as a favor, we'd like you to read it." And of course I said, "Sure." Inside I went, no, God, please don't. It's going to be there. And that book was brilliant. The language was brilliant. It was written by a man named Bori, Praper. And if Riverboat Books survives into the fall, it will be published by Riverboat Books. And it is funny. It's called CYNICISM Management. And it is a satire of modern civilization and a little bit of an ode to friendship. And it's got some of the wildest humor in it you'll ever read. And that was, that didn't have to happen in my life. I may never have gotten so lucky. But I did. I did get lucky. And, generosity pays off, even if you don't ever read anything good by anyone else. It pays off. Read other people's writings. Be generous. Help each other. All writers should help each other. That's all I want to say today. I just want to tell you, be generous to other writers. Thank you very much for tuning in, and talk to you tomorrow.